Heyo! Welcome to Team SNG. Today we are going to be doing the Ogdoadic Deck Profile, and it's going to be the pure build, not utilizing Lair of Darkness as we did last week. Well, I got your attention, I'd like to ask you to leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe. What I like about this deck is the fact that it can go first and go second, much like the Lair variant that we showed off last week. However, this deck is a more controlled variant, so it does definitely prefer to go first, as it has quite a robust trap lineup, which you'll see when we get around to it. And it also utilizes a secondary royal pair outside of the Ogdoadics, which can definitely be an interesting duo. That being said, let's get into it. So starting off with our Ogdoadic remnants, much like in the Ogdoadic Lair deck profile, we're running 3 copies of Nunu and 3 copies of Nauya. Nunu being a Foolish Burial for dark reptiles, and Nauya being a Foolish Burial for light reptiles is really useful, and that coupled with Nauya's search effect and Nunu's floating effect, putting it back on the field to act as tribute fodder, is also extremely useful for the deck. So they're just sort of, they mainstays, they have to be here. Next, onto our Ogdoadic Boundless. A lot of people have said to me that they don't understand why I'm running Flogos in the Lair of Darkness deck, and fair enough. I've taken your notes on board, and I've taken Flogos out. However, I do still run 3 Zoha, because I definitely think Zoha is the better of the 2 Boundless, and it really does a good job of helping out King and helping out Queen potentially as well. So I definitely loved having Zoha. He's basically, in my head, the normal summon of the deck, because everything else special summons out of the grave, so you don't really want to normal summon anything else, but you are happy to normal summon your Zoha and tribute it off. Next, on to our Light and Dark package. Well, we run 2 copies of Kieris, and we're only running 1 Aliart in here, because while you're more likely to banish stuff off in this build than the Lair of Darkness build, Aliart is easy enough to get out later on that it's not the end of the world if you don't see it, and you'd rather not see it in your opening hand at all. Next, we're running 2 copies of the Royal Pair in our Ogdoadic King and our Ogdoadic Queen, much like in our Lair of Darkness build last week. On top of that, we are also running our Ogdoabis, the Ogdoadic Overlord, as well, because, well, he's just a phenomenal boss monster that can definitely make your opponent have to think about how they're going to play around the board that you're going to set up, if he's sitting there as well. That does it for our Ogdoadics. Onto our secondary royal pair. Well, our secondary royal pair probably comes as very little surprise. We have Vennominon, King of the Poisonous Snakes, and Vennominaga, the Deity of Poisonous Snakes. Vennominaga is really quite tough to get out. Both of these are cards that we want to actually summon from our deck using one of our traps in our trap lineup. So that's the reason we don't run more copies. However, you can definitely normal summon your Vennomonium if you have to. Vennominaga has a very strict summoning condition, but it has an alternate win con attached to it. So what do? Well, Vennomonium gets 500 attack points for every reptile in our grave, and seeing as we are running a grave-centric reptile deck, we're likely to have quite a few reptiles in our grave. Vennominaga also gains 500 attack points for every reptile in our grave. So, they both have that going for them. If either of them are destroyed by battle, you can banish a reptile from your grave to revive them. Vennominaga, though, is also unaffected by the card effects, making her a bit of an Ultimate Falcon or Towers or whatever you want to your analogy of that is. And if she inflicts battle damage, you place a Hyper Venom counter on her. And once she has 3 Hyper Venom counters on her, well, that's it, guys. You win the game right off the bat. So, Vennominaga is an interesting win con that the deck has access to in this pure build. And that does it for our monsters. Onto our spells and traps. So, I'm running a bit of a slightly unorthodox spell trap lineup. First of which is a copy of Ogdoadic Origin. I only run 1 because you can search it out with your Nauya. But Ogdoadic Origin is so good in this deck because it makes destroying your Vennomonium by battle, or your Vennominaga by battle, which is the only way you can get rid of Vennominaga, a bit riskier for your opponent, because if your reptile is destroyed by battle, you can target a card on the field and send it to the grave. The other thing this card does is, if this card is destroyed in your field zone, you can send from the top of your opponent's deck to their grave cards equal to the number of reptile monsters with different names in your graveyard. So this basically can limit your opponent's options, but it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because if your opponent's playing a grave-centric deck like ours, well, you could be in trouble. To partner up with Ogdoadic Origin, though, we are running our 3 copies of our Ogdoadic Water Lily. So if you don't see your Water Lily in your opening hand, then your Nauya is going to search out your Water Lily. But if you see your Water Lily in your opening hand, the reason I'm running Origin is I just want to have some other options of what to search with our Nauya. So that's part of the main reason I run the Origin, actually. Next, we're running 3 copies of the combo starter for the deck, and that is our Snake Rain, of course. And we're running 3 copies of our deck's draw power in our trade-in. We are still running 7 level 8s, so trade-in will likely be live most of the time it's in our hand. Onto our traps, we are running the 1 Ogdoadic Hollow. Again, you can search this out with your Nauya if you've seen your Water Lily, and it's more advantageous for you to have Ogdoadic Hollow on the field. Don't forget, Ogdoadic Hollow partners really well with Queen, not only acting as grave removal from your opponent by taking something out of their grave, but also acting as spot removal with your Queen, sending something to grave when you activate this. Now onto our Vennomonium and Vennominaga traps. We are running 2 copies of Rise of the Snake Deity, which says if a Vennomonium is destroyed by card effect while on the field, you can activate this and special summon from your hand or your deck a Vennominaga. So this is your way of getting your Vennominaga onto the field. One of the ways that you're going to want to destroy your Vennomonium is probably with Offering to the Snake Deity, which is effectively Icarus attack but for reptiles. So the reason I run 3 of this is it's still a useful card for us to have access to, even if we don't have Vennomonium on field. But if we have Vennomonium on field and we have Rise of the Snake Deity on field, well, then it's an extremely useful card. Now, I mentioned that we like to cheat our Vennomonium out of the deck. Well, the way that we do that is by using damage equal reptile. Running 2 copies of it, but what it does is, once per turn, if you take battle damage, you can special summon from your deck a reptile with attack equal to or less than the damage taken. And seeing as Vennomonium in deck has 0 attack, you're in really good shape, because it doesn't matter how much damage you take from that battle, you are going to be able to get your Vennomonium out. However, if you take more damage, like you take 400 damage or more, then you can get your Kierce out, and your Kierce can special summon from the grave, so that can be useful. If you get 100 and you've already got Vennomonium, your Nunu becomes an option for you, as does Nauya. And if you take more than 1500, well, you can now put Zoha on the field. So, damage equals reptile is an interesting card because it does let you cheat out several different things, but realistically, you're using it to cheat out your Vennomonium. And if you have your Vennomonium and your Rise of the Snake Deity, then you can potentially go into your Vennominaga as well. And just to make sure our Rise of the Snake Deity is going to be available to us, we are running 3 copies of Trap Trick. So this is useful because it can let us search out our Offering to the Snake Deity or our Rise to the Snake Deity, whichever one we don't have. So that can be really useful for us, as it does let us get whatever it is we're missing onto the field. And those are for the main deck. Onto the extra deck. Well, yet again, the extra deck isn't super important in this. So, we're running a King of the Feral Imps. Again, much like in our Lair deck profile I mentioned, you don't really want to go into a rank 4 to search. There's enough ways to search in the deck. But he's here just in case. We're running a Bagutska, and then we're running a small Utopia package, just because it's a rank 4, and that can be useful. Then we're also running rank 8s with our Dingirsu, our Hope Harbinger, and our Galaxy Eyes package, much like, well, exactly like our Lair build from last week. Finally, we're running some links in this. We're running the Reptilian link, which will let you turn one of your opponent's monsters' attacks down to 0 when it is summoned, which is really useful. And it will let you search out reptiles equal to the number of monsters your opponent has whose attacks are 0. So it can be really useful to help you search out whatever it is you're missing. We also run a very small Nightmare package with our Phoenix and our Unicorn, and finally, just to round things off, we're running a couple Link 4s in Boral Sword and Appaloosa. My final thoughts on this deck are that this deck is actually a really interesting deck. The ability to go into the Ogdoadic Royal at pair and cause interactions that way is really useful. You know, coupling with the Overlord, who is going to be a big problem that your opponent's going to have to worry about, can be really good too. However, I also kind of like the addition of Vennominon and Vennominaga because of the very simple fact that what they do is they put your opponent's attention on them and away from the Ogdoadics. The minute that Vennominon hits the field, your opponent's going to look at your back row and go, Christ, I got to get rid of that, because if I don't, then Vennominaga is going to hit the board, and if Vennominaga hits the board, your opponent's entire focus will go to how do they get rid of Vennominaga permanently. Because if they can't get rid of your Vennominaga, then you could potentially steal the game using her effect. So your opponent is going to be in a situation where they are definitely going to think, what am I going to do? And they take their attention away from the Ogdoadics, who will then just sneak up on your opponent and cause them, well, some venomous damage. You know, the whole deck being fueled by Snake Rain, obviously you don't want to send off your Vennominon and Vennominaga because you've got no way of getting them back from the grave, but Snake Rain fueling your Ogdoadics is still really powerful. When Ogdoadics has its own Foolish Burial and Monster Reborn. And the nice thing about Water Lily is that Water Lily can actually bring back your Vennominon if it's in the grave. So if you do have Snake Rain and you want to get to your Vennominon, you could potentially go Water Lily and into your Vennominon that way. The trap lineup that the deck has access to is really utilitarian, especially with Offerings of the Snake Deity being completely a viable option across the deck, as all your monsters are reptiles, and you can utilize any of them to take 2 cards off of your opponent's field. That, coupled with Rise of the Snake Deity, will obviously help you turbo out your Vennominaga, and your damage equals reptile is really useful in the sense that what it'll let you do is turbo out your Vennominon and cheat out potentially Kierce for the Ogdoadic engine if you want to, with that option as well. Finally, our 1 reptile extra deck card in Reptilian Echidna, putting your opponent on their back foot and also netting yourself a search by lowering their monster's attacks to 0 is really nice. That being said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe. Watch one of these 2 videos if you haven't seen them already, and I'll see you guys at the next video.